He's known for building high-performing teams and helping organizations scale smarter, even in complex and regulated environments. So please help me in welcoming John David Wood, seen come out in the recent years that has helped supply chain industry a lot, like for example, AI or AR or SaaS, like stuff like
So we'll go back to my not conservative.
the operations and what are some of like the good things and the bad things of it when you're pursuing.
That's a loaded question to ask me.
Yep.
I've done it both ways, and I support companies that.
Obviously, it's going to vary from area to area, but what has been one of the biggest cultural barrier for you when helping a company kind of pass through that transformation? What have you to overcome that part?
Yeah, so I think I'll just kind of expand a little bit on.
Actually, get your hands dirty.
Get dirty.
Welcome everyone to the We Serve E-Business Solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the greatest industry experts to talk about their experiences, gather some helpful tips along the way. So I'm Cynthia, your host, and today we're joined by an accomplished leader who operates at the nexus of strategy, execution, and technology. As a principal consultant for strategy and operations at the WeWood Group, he has spent over 20 years driving growth, efficiency, and innovation across a diverse range of industries from pharmaceuticals, healthcare, logistics, SaaS. We call him a certified Six Sigma Black Belt. He's known for building high-performing teams and helping organizations scale smarter, even in complex and regulated environments. So please help me in welcoming John David Woods. John, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hi, Cynthia, and I think I need to ask you to come with me on every client call going forward to do some
Perfect.
description of what we do. That was awesome. Thank you.
But I'm glad I was able to capture everything from your career, because it's just reading about it, such a fascinating career, what you've gone through. And we would love to start there. Like, how have you started? Why supply chain? And how's it going?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, for me, supply chain was entirely accidental. I actually graduated as an English teacher, was sent to a school system in New Jersey, Rahway Public School System. I am, full disclosure, about 5'9", and at the time 165 pounds. And the expectation for every male school teacher was to be a fight referee. So I immediately left the school system, and a friend of mine worked for Kraft Foods, and he arranged for me to start as a warehouse foreman in a union shop. And I will say this, 75% of what I know about managing people and relating to people, I learned on the loading dock with the union guys at General Foods. Imagine, graduating college, knowing virtually nothing about how businesses or distribution works. And here are guys driving forklifts that have worked for the same company for 20 years, in the same role, been amply compensated, have beach houses, and you're supposed to manage them. You learn quickly that you don't matter at all.
Yeah.
So, and I carried that philosophy pretty much through my career, and I think that's what's helped me. Going into new spaces like pharmaceutical marketing, pharmaceutical distribution, even luxury, wall covering. You walk in and you just learn from the people that are there, and you bring your ability to ask questions and your curiosity with you. And I've always looked at my role as, I love solving problems, so let me find a problem to solve.
Yeah,
That help?
that's amazing. That's amazing. And I've heard so many people say that supply chain has been accidental for them. They've started at a warehouse or some like really grunted job that our generation is like, that's like the worst job to have.
Sure.
But that's where you guys have learned so much from your experiences. So over the years, I would ask, like, what has been that one job that has been the worst but has taught you the most, except warehouse?
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I was brought into a semi turnaround situation. I was hired to work for a competitor in a COO role, largely pharmaceutical supply chain. So a lot of relabeling, repackaging, import, export, things like that. And I don't want to give too much away, but the product, or to identify the company,
Uh-huh.
but they had a legacy product that had virtually nothing to do with that. And the company had been founded on that legacy product, and the sales team was comped on it. And so we had all this great technology that could give you visibility over builds, visibility over where your raws were. We could pretty
Yeah.
much predict when your sales force was going to have samples in their hand, and we were out
Uh-huh.
selling basically a coupon. And the comp plan, heavily favored that. And
Yeah.
there were a couple of different approaches. You could just sort of go in there and scream and yell, but again, oftentimes you find you don't have the power you think you do, even with a C next to your
Yeah.
name. And so what we did is we took an educational approach.
Mm-hmm.
We built out sales engineers that could go
Mm-hmm.
with the existing salespeople. And slowly actually, I became one of them because I wanted to learn, I wanted to listen. What happened is all of a sudden the sales team watched their customers engage on new topics, and
Uh-huh.
they watched their customers. They saw the interest they had in the technology and how the technology could make their life easier. And then it flipped in about a quarter from keep that away from me to teach me how to sell that. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing happens overnight, but
Yeah.
that was a really tough scenario where I had a pretty downbeaten IT team that was working on really cool toys, really good
Yeah.
products. I had a customer service team that heard what their customers wanted, but I had a sales team that really was disincented, no fault of their
Yeah.
own, from selling it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a
Yeah.
tough scenario. I'm smiling and laughing about it now, but there were a good 6 months where it wasn't smiles and laughs for me.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, right? Like seeing the actual case study happening in front of you. That's the educational stuff. So, one question that I was curious to ask you in the beginning itself was you've gone through so many different industries within the whole supply chain aspect.
Mhm.
How does it differ, like the responsibilities? Do they differ in each of the industry, or are they more so the same?
Mhm.
Like the values and the things, are they the same or are they different? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the core of
Mm-hmm.
being the person that tries to unstick a company, I
Uh-huh.
look at supply chain as my job is to unstick it. You need it
Yeah.
tomorrow. How do we get things flowing faster, flowing smoother, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think the core of that is universal.
Uh-huh.
I think if you move from regulated industries to non-regulated industries, you'll see
Exactly.
that some of the compliance pieces come out,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
some of the accountability for, CGMP that falls
Mm-hmm.
on operations in a non-regulated industry falls on an entirely different place in a regulated
Yeah.
industry. And you have to learn to work together on that.
Yeah.
My role when I'm in a regulated industry is to become an asset to compliance, not a competitor.
Mm-hmm.
So I may look at it a different way, but I know what the goal is. And I know that you're taking all the heat for achieving that goal. So how do I help you? Right.
Yeah.
Whereas in, wallpaper, I did an unbelievably short but amazing stint in, that was all on me. Every OSHA, every transportation, every that fall on my department, right? So I think that's
Okay.
one example of how if you move from industry to industry, there are subtle changes.
Uh-huh.
But the approach is take the knowledge that you have, assume you don't know everything, and just be
Yeah.
an asset.
Yep. And then how do you, so like for example, regulated industries, right?
Mhm,
Like pharmas and healthcares. There are so many different types of regulation in terms of what can come in and what can go out. How do
mhm.
you balance the whole aspect of innovation and digitalization in those kind of areas?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really really good question. That's like the secret sauce, right? So let's create a bucket to talk about, right? If we're not
Mhm.
talking about extreme innovation, companies that are building new technologies themselves,
Yeah.
they have a whole set of rules that apply to them. That man, that's wonderful. I really probably don't want too much to do with that. Let's talk
Hmm.
about companies that are maturing, semi-mature, emerging, right? That aren't builders of the tech themselves. In that
Yeah.
case, I like to buy more than I like to build because I like to
Hmm.
have something that's been tested. I like to have resources on it. I like to have something that I don't have all the risk. And in
Yeah.
that scenario, you can often find a really great emerging technology that
Hmm.
doesn't have the compliance ready. So now you
Yeah.
have to partner with that tech provider. And that's
Hmm.
tricky. And that's really the
Yeah.
secret sauce. The key there is to build a partnership. Make sure you first know that they are interested in all of the validation steps, all of the documentation steps, right? All of the ongoing inspections that's about to happen to them, right? Lay out the path with them, right? Make sure that you add 50% at least to whatever their estimate is as they are starting to build out their product for a regulated industry. And then you have to become the teacher. You have to be willing to embed your resources. They have to be willing to accept them. Your project managers, your validation specialists, your compliance people, they really need to get in there and help them as they build out the components that are going to be, require compliance. And so it's really a partnership, helps drive somebody that has a strong interest in innovating. In the early days, Microsoft was a great example. The product owner for Dynamics at the time really wanted to be in pharmaceutical, really wanted to be in regulatory, and they were just willing to work with their customers to come up with solutions that would work for everybody. They were a great example. I've had other vendors where we've ultimately had to walk away from a big investment because they just, no matter how much we explained what they were in for, they were not ready for it, and you can't blame them, if they don't know. I feel like there was a part 2 to that question I missed.
No, I think that was kind of like that was the main question. But the part 2 comes now is, over the years, and especially now, when you're working with these kind of, different, I would say, business results, right? Business metrics. What has been one of the best digital transformation that you've seen come out in the recent years that has helped supply chain industry a lot? Like, like for example, AI or AR or SaaS, like stuff like that.
Yeah. So we'll go back to my not conservative, but not bleeding edge approach here. In the last few years, AR combined with, very mundane learning algorithms, we probably call it AI right now. I think that would be a misnomer. But there has been a wonderful injection of AR into almost every component of supply chain. We've watched companies out there deploy virtual pick walls, where you used to have pick lights for putting, matching inbound components and matching paperwork. Now you have some glasses, you pick up the product, you pick up the document even, it recognizes the shape, it projects where it goes. On the document handling side, simple OCR technology, the recognition technology, now truly incorporates learning algorithms. Take a stack of like 30 documents, you drop it on, and boom, 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 boom. Now you don't need people routing. You don't have the delays of people trying to adjudicate bad documents. The error recognition and error correction is just outstanding. So on the sort of mundane section, you'd be amazed how many people in supply chain are still not deploying just those kinds of technologies that we spoke about, right? There's a whole big push for agentic AI, which is coming. But by the time I'm ready, and I think most people are ready to deploy it, it's going to have to be niched down really tight into what type of supply chain you're managing, what your expectations are. You're going to have a very strict data set. Like if you're doing raw material import for food or pharma or fragrance, right? You can't train AI to monitor and make decisions for you on the same data that you would be looking at slugs or components, because you have spoilage issues, you have cross-contamination issues, you have, right? So you have to, we're going to have to niche down pretty tight before truly we can unleash something like agentic AI into the space. But in the meantime, there are all these technologies just one step behind it that I think people aren't exploring because they're pushing aside, ordinary process improvement for this quantum leap that they're waiting for.
Exactly. So in your experience, when you look at this, what is like some of the keys to kind of aligning the strategy with execution? Like how do you kind of help companies align these strategies as they go along?
Yeah, so I think, there's a pretty basic thing that many medium-sized emerging companies and some really large companies are afraid of, and it's sit down with your client, sit down with your customer, talk to them. Right? Unless you are some really extended cranium genius who can anticipate a problem and then anticipate a solution, I think the real key is sit down with your clients, and more importantly, bring people from your organization with you, right? The people that most likely the people who least want to be there, you should drag. You should drag your head of programming, who would rather be locked in a vault safe somewhere. You should bring your head of logistics, right? And sit down and listen to the customer's issues. and then go back and humbly solve them with the tools that you have and with solutions you can actually provide. What I see is it goes both ways, right? You get some salesperson out there who just means well, doesn't have and I've been that guy, so means well, but doesn't really understand the depth of solutions that they have. So just sort of goes out there, I want to sell this widget, and if you don't buy that widget, I'm done. Right. And then I've also been the other salesman who gets a little too excited and says, "Yeah, we can do that." Right. And maybe you've got to take some time to think about it. So I like to bring 4 people from my organization, the people involved in delivery, your import person, the person has the relationships with the carriers and the customs clearance, and right, they can keep you safe on what's possible. I like to bring the IT guys because sometimes they get bored and all of a sudden, bam, you've got this solution you never thought you had, right? I like to bring your distribution, your final mile people together because, somebody just forgot to ask us a simple question. So if you get everybody in that room and you listen to the customer's need, you're gonna make those jumps a lot easier than if you're just relying on, coming up with it in a conference room.
Yeah, just the data, right?
Yeah.
So nice. So that's like, if I kind of look at that now, in terms of digitalizations and AI, where it's going, there's a lot of these services that have kind of outsourced over the years because there are countries that are focusing directly on these services. So in your experience, how does that help with scaling the operations, and what are some of like the good things and the bad things of it when you're pursuing it?
Well, that's a loaded question to ask me because I've done it. I've done it both ways, and I support companies that do it both ways. So I'm gonna watch me thread this needle. So I think the first thing is how. How do you approach these companies, right? This is going to sound like an example, or I'm answering a different question, but bear with me. In my career, I've been brought in many cases to manage teams that do things that I don't know how to do, right? I've done spare parts logistics for military ships, right? I've managed the engineers that provision the spare parts, and how fun is that? But I can't do what I do. I've managed, really bleeding edge guys doing recognition technologies and matching and identification. I don't know how to do that. So the way that I found to manage them, and we'll make the jump now, is by asking them to make predictions and then holding them accountable to their predictions, right? I don't know what you do, but I can determine how well you know what you're doing by your ability to predict how long it will take, how much it will cost, how it will affect things. So from that perspective, when I look at outsource relationships, depending on whether it's some mundane back office task or whether it's an innovation maneuver, there's going to be sort of a sliding scale of freedom and a sliding scale of how much I have to rely on you to make predictions, and I test you against them. And then, beyond that, a lot of it just comes down to, basic vendor management. You have to think of, you're buying a product, you're buying a solution, it's just ongoing, right? So it's like a material supplier. So I'm going to set up QBRs. I'm going to encourage my clients to set up quarterly business reviews. We're going to talk about metrics that matter, right? Not let's get together and somebody fires off how many orders we did. I know how many orders you did. Right? If I don't, I'm not doing my job. Let's talk about, right? Let's talk about deviations. Let's talk about service interruptions. Let's talk about the ugly stuff in a constructive way. Let's solve those problems together. And you have presumably more clients than I do. So now you bring me some ideas that'll help my business run better. And I like to break that relationship up into, what's my forecast? What's my future need? How's the relationship look right now from a positive and constructive next steps perspective? And then how do we innovate together? And you can take that philosophy to anything, including, back office billing, right? Something mundane like outsourcing that. It gets a little more complex if you start talking about sourcing things like development.
Exactly.
In that case, I'm going to put more control in place. I'm going to have my PMs on it. I'm going to have my BAs on it. Right. And you can have, as a supplier, your own PMs, you can have, but your communication on project priority, project deliverables, and business outcomes are going to be people on my team. And you find the right partner and they welcome that because they don't want to spend extra money fixing, the wrong feature that they built the right way. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And you bring up a good point that adding somebody from the company's end who can actually take control, like they're actually managing these outsourcing companies, very important, because I've worked with companies that directly come to me, they don't really know the scale of outsourcing they want to do, but it's more like they treat us as, what can you do for me? There's no vision to it. Like, what are you looking for? What is it going to be, helping you with? Is there somebody to manage it? Like, that kind of question kind of scares companies over,
Yeah.
when we're having those discussions. So according to you, what is like, how do organizations, or how can organizations know that they're ready for these large scale transformations? Like, ready to bring in support that is cost effective, but also will be efficient for your own company. How do you help with that?
Yeah. Okay. So that packed. I love it. Okay.
Yep.
So first one, you've got to look at the company itself. Where is the enterprise that wants to bring in the support?
Yeah.
Where are they in terms of understanding their own systems and processes? There's a sort of a fallacy out there that if I don't know how to do it, I can bring somebody in to do it for
But
me.
yep.
And that works, if you can truly encapsulate something, all right, then you're talking about integrations being the key point. But
Yeah.
very few companies can just completely outsource a function. You can't completely outsource development, because then you have nobody, for example, that knows how the product works, how how the
Yeah.
systems work. You really can't outsource, in my mind, your material sourcing function 100%. It's just too strategic, right?
Yeah.
So in that instance, you've got to really document and understand how your processes work today. And then I would and stop. Here's the beauty, right? If you have the luxury of doing this right, then turn this into a problem-solving session with the new supplier. Here's exactly
Yeah.
how we do it today. Here's our desired outcome. Before we sign a contract, let's work together. Sometimes it's worth paying for like a BRD or some sort of a study,
Yeah.
but let's work together on, what you see as the ideal solution. Let's run a simulation. Let's run a small scale test, and let's watch that flow through my systems and processes and see if that
Exactly.
works,
Yeah.
right? And then I think you said something that's important, at least during kickoff and maybe the first year.
Yeah.
You don't put somebody on site to be a cop. You put somebody on site to be a resource, to answer the
Yeah.
questions, right? How does this, a good partner is asking a question, right? How does this change? How does this affect my client's internal operations? So,
Exactly.
right. So if you figure your implementation is going to be, what's the best percent actually ready you think
Yeah.
you've launched with, right?
Yeah.
80, I mean, is
Exactly.
80 perfect, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a 75% cooked solution, means you're still building 25% of it along the way. You need
Yeah.
access to a resource. So I like your approach there. That's how I recommend it. You are not saving money before the integration and partnership is completely in place. In fact, you may spend more if you're
Yeah.
going to get it right. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that organizations need to be ready for. And I think that's one of the keys. So when I'm working with really big organizations, and they've got big budget and that's fine. When I'm
Yeah.
working with emerging and mid-sized organizations, really need to get to know ownership. I really need to get to know if it's a PE fund, that management fund's philosophy. Because if you're not ready to invest in a solution, truly invest in it, not think you're saving money day one, and then you're not ready for it, right?
Yeah.
My mom used to say, she was from New York. She'd say, you get nothing for nothing, JD,
Yep.
and you get nothing for nothing.
It's true.
So,
Yep.
that's one of the key things that I look for. The other thing I look for internally is sort of what's the team's appetite for outside learning, right? If
Yeah.
I'm working with a team and I say, so when's the last time you reached out to a industry organization, or had somebody from another place kind of come in and look at your operation? And if they say, oh, no, 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 we're the best at this, we know how to do this, or we've been
Yeah.
doing this for 20 years, we don't need any help, or oh, I talked to George, who's in the organization, who told me this was the right way to do it. I start
Yep.
hearing those things, and I start to put the brakes on, and I go, we need a little culture shift here first before we can possibly think of outsourcing.
Yeah, I think that's where my next question would be, the cultural aspect of it, right? And
Hmm.
it's obviously it's going to vary from area to area, but what has been one of the biggest cultural barrier for you when helping a company kind of pass through that transformation? What have you done to overcome that part?
Yeah, so I think I'll just kind of expand a little bit on that last one. I have a friend who's a psychologist. He's an organizational psychologist. It's not as much
Uh-huh.
fun as you think because you can't, go out and have a beer and just, get your problems aired out because it's always you. But why did you think that was going to happen that way, JD? But he has a thing he calls castle syndrome. Okay. And so he would say, sometimes one of the things that causes organizations to stall in their growth is that they sort of get together in their castle tower and they
Uh-huh.
defend themselves from outside input, right?
Yeah.
And you start to spot it because you see people sort of referring to each other as my esteemed colleague JD would say, right?
Yep.
Right? And so now you get a lot of people sort of confirming their own beliefs and confirming their own processes and philosophies and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the hardest cultural barriers to overcome when you are trying to set a company up for scale. Because
Yeah.
scale is going to require finding right partners, trusting them. It's going
Yeah.
to find being able to bring in outside managers, experts, consultants, and not have the team, circle the wagons and defend themselves against it. Ways to overcome that, right, is one, the right questions, right? And so
Yeah.
the first sort of annoying question to ask is, well, according to who and measured by what? Right? Are you
Yeah.
measuring that? Right? But really what you want to get to is you want to get to a environment where curiosity is
Hmm.
rewarded, where
Yeah.
curiosity is discussed, where curiosity is a value, because that's when you start to see the doors open. I don't like to get into percentages of people or whatever because companies are
Yeah.
small. People have hiring biases. You don't know. But I mean, there's a significant portion of people at work who don't know they're supposed to be curious.
Yeah.
And opening that door for them is like one of my favorite things to do. Wait, it's
Yeah.
my job to make it better? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my job to have ideas and encourage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're gonna pick you up and put you on a pedestal if you do. And so start with the spark of curiosity, bring in problem solving skills like lean, like Six Sigma, and involve people
Hmm.
in voice of the customer, voice of the business, and just as importantly, voice of the process or voice of the employee activities. And then you
Yeah.
start to break that culture because you get a culture that block of that castle syndrome because you develop a culture that expects change and they expect change that works for them as well.
Yeah.
Voice of
Exactly.
process, voice of employee.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you because one of the questions I always ask my customers or my clients is, how is it going to make your life easy? Like on
Right.
your day-to-day level, how is it going to make it easy for you? And it's so hard for some people to answer. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like for me or the company? I'm like,
No, no,
no,
no,
for
no, no,
you.
no. My job is to
Exactly.
sacrifice.
Yep. That's what they think. It's like, my job is horrible. It's like, why is it horrible? Like, what
Yeah.
do you do day to day? Right. So that's the most fun question to ask the clients because it really gets them tongue tied. Are you asking about the company or me? It's like, no, well, you. How does it help you? So,
Yeah. How do we get
castle
you
syndrome.
right? How do we get you to use more of this? Right.
Yeah. Yep.
I had a early mentor, a guy named Lofty, who was he was character. He would walk out like we would go look at, we'd go visit the transportation department. We'd go visit
Yeah.
the fleets. And he would walk out in the warehouse and he'd grab the warehouse manager and he'd go, "How are we doing it today with more brains and less backs?" There's one question he had, but it was always more brains, less backs, right? And I've carried that through with me everywhere. Do we have to brute force it, or can we solve it, with a
Yeah.
more process based solution? And I agree. Most people are shocked when you say that.
Yep. Yep. Oh my God, John, this has been just such an amazing conversation. I hate to like kind of cut it short, but I do want to ask you, I still want to ask you a few questions because I feel the way you're answering them kind of makes it practical for the viewers to kind of see, this is what you're going through on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
But that one lesson that you have learned in your 20 years, 20 plus years of
Hmm.
transformational leadership, being an author, being a strategist, all of the things you've done, what do you want to pass on to the next generation?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I've beaten curiosity to death. But it's my
Yeah.
first. My go-to is be curious, right?
Be
But I
curious.
think
Yep.
I think my second one is goes back to the loading dock. It goes back to the plant floor. It goes back
Warehouse.
to the warehouse. It goes back to the coding, room. Get your experience, as they would say in lean. They talk about doing a Jumbo walk, right?
Uh-huh.
And which just literally simply translates to go to the place, right? Go to
Yeah.
where the value is. And I would say my advice to anybody, whether you're a CEO, a starting supervisor, a marketer, go to the place where the value is created and talk to the people who are creating it. Get to know them. That's where your culture really is. That's where
Hmm.
your customer experience really is. If you are a drayage company and you're providing final mile, talk to the drivers. They
Yeah.
interact with your customers. If you are developing, some cool picking software, you talk to the
Hmm.
developers, right?
Yeah.
But get to know the people that are doing the work. It will humble you very
Yeah.
quickly, and it will bring to you the real sense of the value that your company is providing and what it can do.
Yeah. Actually get your hands dirty.
Get dirty, get out there.
Yep.
Yeah, so many
Perfect.
people want to
Perfect.
manage from the conference room. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Get on the
It just
floor,
doesn't
get in
work.
the truck,
Yeah.
go watch the code being written, even if you don't understand a single statement they're writing. Listen to what they're
Yep.
saying and listen to the questions they're asking.
Exactly. That's perfect. And I guess last question, I won't keep you holding,
Mhm.
but what is the thing that excites you the most about, the future of operations, the transformation over the next few decades that you have seen? Like what is the
Yeah.
next thing that excites you the most?
So I really can't wait to see, and I don't know if it's happening fast enough, but I can't wait to see really where AI ends up. True
Yeah.
AI, not
Yeah.
the large language models we're calling AI today. They have
Yeah.
limitations, but when we can actually turn over mundane tasks and really focus on relationships and innovation and creativity, I want to see where we go. What do we focus on? Our primary social institution, at least in the United States, is business,
Yeah.
right? They're where we go. They're where we meet people. They're where we add value. They're where we define our relationship to our world. And
Exactly. Yeah.
as AI becomes more able to anticipate, needs, I mean, imagine when you have fully not only integrated but responsive algorithms talking to each other, what supply chain is going to look like. Like
Yeah.
I anticipate needing, a new electric shaver, and it's there, right?
Uh-huh.
Because my social media behavior has integrated with the retailer who's integrated, their AI is anticipating it now. We're buying raws 6 months in
Yeah.
advance, right?
Exactly.
And I just can't wait to see what that sort of completely N of one, almost timeless, frictionless supply chain looks like, and
Yeah.
what we're going to do as humans when that's real.
Then that's real. Yep. And I think everybody is there, right? Everybody's
Yeah.
looking at the next big AI thing and how it's going to change. Perfect. John, this has been such an enlightening conversation, but also a fun conversation. Learning about people, how to connect with people, how to get your hands dirty, and what to look out for. So thank you so much for joining and
Thank you for
sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Cynthia. This has been fun.
Same here. Thank you so much, John.